What's up, everybody? Brady Figueroa here, coming at you with a review for the new Whitechapel album, Hymns In Dissonance, released just yesterday, Friday, March 7th. Deathcore pioneers, Whitechapel, back at it again with their 9th album now and their first offering since 2021's Kin. And to preface, I probably should mention that I am definitely coming at this album from a different perspective as the typical Whitechapel fan would. Because with their first array of albums that established their deathcore sound and honestly pioneered deathcore as we know it today, I enjoy them, but I'm not like a big super fan of them. Like I didn't really discover them at the time when they came out, and I actually prefer overall Whitechapel's more recent output, like The Valley and Kin, because they do feel a bit more expansive, they're a bit more experimental, a bit more unpredictable. So while many Whitechapel fans were excited and anticipating the kind of return to the roots type sound that many people were describing this album as, I kind of went into it with a much more open mind. And I think as a result of that, I have come to somewhat of a different conclusion as the majority of reviews and people that have listened to this album have so far, but not for a lack of quality and praise. I think this is a good album. What I mean by that is I'm seeing so many people saying, fuck yeah, Whitechapel's back to their roots. It sounds like old Whitechapel. And yeah, I mean, they've obviously gone back to their really, really heavy and brutal deathcore sound. And later in the track list, a song like Bedlam feels pretty snugly in with their early catalog, just with those just vicious breakdowns and mean chord progressions, and vocally the track is dominated by Phil's really rhythmic gutturals. But to my ears, the majority of this album feels like a new chapter in Whitechapel's catalog. I loved the first two singles, or I guess the only two singles that were released for this album, A Visceral Wretch and the title track, Hymns In Dissonance. And the main reason why I really enjoyed these tracks is because they did feel a lot more experimental, unpredictable, which, as you just heard, are elements that I enjoyed from their last couple of albums, except with these songs, they're still doing that, but with these much heavier sounds and influences. So it was my hope that the entire album as a whole, or at least the majority of it, would keep that going. And for the most part, I would say it did. Like, just in the way this album opens with that starting 1-2 punch of Prisoner 666 and the title track, this album immediately just is demonic and evil and dark in the best way possible. I mean, of course, there's Prisoner 666, which I don't even know if I have to break that down. I mean, just read the fucking title. But the ominous note choices and the way Phil delivers that line when he says 666 just takes that home for me. And I'm still absolutely loving the title track. I mean, that demonic chanting part where Phil screams backwards is just so infectious yet so dark at the same time, which is such a difficult balance to strike, and Whitechapel just absolutely crushes it on this song. And the song just perfectly illustrates my point when I mean that this song is a bit more, I keep using the same adjectives, but experimental, unpredictable, just because you really don't know what's going to happen next. Like, there's those steamrolling death metal sections with the blast beats, there's those crushing breakdowns, there's those more hardcore-oriented parts with the open power chords being played and those fast drums underneath it. And this song, without really having much repetition to it, still manages to feel really, really cohesive and like a tight unit, despite it being pretty constantly evolving the entire time. And that's always enjoyable for me to listen to in a song and do that and execute it well. Track 3, Diabolic, Slumber, kind of keeps this momentum going with these really evil and somewhat blackened vibes with that really unsettling intro chord progression. I will also mention that parts and melodies like this that do sound really eerie and evil does really support the lyrical themes going on here, which this album is actually about a cult leader, a satanic cult leader trying to indoctrinate people into his cult, with his goal actually being to, I believe, travel to another dimension or something like that. Whitechapel super fans, comment below if I got that right. That's just from what I remember hearing. I've always really enjoyed Whitechapel's lyrical content just because they do really prioritize overall concepts on their album without making it too gimmicky or putting the lyrical concepts in front of the music and prioritizing that over the actual music. They just always make the music work and fit the lyrical themes, whether it's the more dark and brutal kind of themes on their first few albums or the more kind of deep and intimate lyrics of their last few. And this is another great example of that. I mean, with those dark lyrics that I just mentioned, the music really does fit and match it. With their last couple albums, Kin in the Valley, I think sort of that sort of more melodic and experimental sound fit those lyrics. I don't know if it would have worked here with this kind of lyrical imagery, so I'm glad that they did go back heavier just for that. But Diabolic Slumber is without a doubt one of the highlights on this album for me, especially in the album cuts rather than the singles. Some of my absolute favorite chord progressions on the album are on this song. There's that sort of like solo-esque section on the guitar that kicks into like the 306 mark, give or take, and it gives sort of like a nod to classic metal and black metal at the same time simultaneously. Easy highlight for me on the album, both in the overall song and that specific chord progression. And then just to top it off, the song ends with that just absolutely crushing, bludgeoning breakdown, which still manages to carry over those just real mean sounds that the rest of the song has established so far. As you near the end of the album, the songs that do kind of take clear influences from past Whitechapel albums do become a bit more present, which that's not a bad thing at all. If anything, I think it adds to the diversity of the album, with maybe the exception being Abysmal Gospel, at least for the second half of the album goes, which is another amazing song and a favorite of mine on the album. I have very similar compliments to this song as I did on Diabolic Slumber, and the title track as well, just because of how this song has such a amazing just mismatch of these different metal subgenres, because again, you got the hardcore parts like near the end, you got the more evil, ominous black metal parts, and you got the death metal and deathcore sound kind of tying everything together. As I mentioned earlier, the track Bedlam is definitely the biggest nod to Whitechapel's classic and earliest material, just in the overall style of it, with the prominent use of breakdowns and Phil's very rhythmic style of guttural singing, like I mentioned earlier, guttural screaming, I should say. But again, that's not for a lack of quality. I think the song really works on this album, actually, because it is, like, to me, at least to my ears, like I said, as not, like, the biggest Whitechapel super fan, like, it just gives that nod to it, and it kind of diversifies the album a little bit. And plus, just that main groove is an absolute fucking monster. It just brings to mind, like, this lumbering machine just, like, moving forward. Mammoth God is a song that kind of does that as well, just in the overall kind of nod to Whitechapel's early work, but not quite as much as Bedlam, because there is more of those shrieky high screams from Phil and some more ominous note choices, which were still present on Whitechapel's earlier material, but they seem a lot more at the forefront here rather than just kind of having those melodies placed over the deathcore passages. At the 2:56 mark, there's actually a shreddy guitar solo that I thought was cool and really fit the song, and then it's capped off by this vicious shriek from Phil that then just throws you back into the deathcore death metal passages. And then there's some more harmonized soloing that actually ends the song. And then the closing track, Nothing Is Coming For Any of Us, while it is still really heavy and overall definitely a deathcore song, did remind me the most of their recent albums, Kin in the Valley. Just with how epic and long-winded it is, and how the end of the song does kind of have those traces of melody that were not really present on any other parts of this album. But it's also done in a way that brings to mind, at least to my ears, some of the more melodic natures of like atmospheric black metal a little bit. I just mean that in the overall note choices that the song uses on the guitar. Skip to the 3-minute mark of this song to pinpoint the chord progression that does that the most for me. And then those solo sections that end the song and the album do sound a bit more like melodic and triumphant even, which gives the album a somewhat out of place but kind of nice and pleasant send-off, which further illustrates my point just how unpredictable and dynamic this album is. In the middle of the album, there are a couple songs that don't do a whole lot for me, like Hate Cult Ritual is cool just in the overall demonic sound, but I gotta be honest, the whole we hunt, we kill, we feast, we conquer thing that gets repeated throughout the song is a little cheesy to me. I understand thematically how it fits in with the concept of this album, but just, I don't know, the execution just, it was kind of corny to me, not gonna lie. And instrumentally, too, I don't really think this song adds much to the album that isn't said better in other spots. Not a bad song by any means, just one that I don't really see myself coming back to. And the interlude track, Infernis, has some cool melodies, but I just don't really think, again, that it adds much to the album, and it kind of disrupts the flow a little bit. I think this song would have been cooler if it actually used those melodies and built off of them into a full song. Because going from A Visceral Wretch into Hate Cult Ritual with having just that gap in between kind of feels a little disruptive, especially when those ideas aren't really fleshed out at all. The band may have gotten a little flack for it, but I actually think they should have made somewhat of a more atmospheric and maybe sort of melodic track from those ideas, and I think they still could have done it in a way that fit the album and done it in a way that still sounds evil and dark and sinister, demonic, all those words you can use. I think a full track like that would have actually added a lot to the album. But there's just no way I can upload this review without seriously giving praise to frontman Phil Bozeman and his vocal performance on here. He really does sound better than ever. I mean, his gutturals sound absolutely just fucking vicious, and he brings in very prominently those very shrieky black metal-esque high screams that he's growing more and more fond of. I think one of the main reasons I don't revisit a lot of Whitechapel's older material is just because of how monolithic the vocal style is on those albums, but I cannot say that at all about this album. Not only does Phil absolutely kill it with every style he utilizes on here, but he knows exactly when to use each style. Like, I think when he does the shrieky high screams and the low guttural screams and everything in between, it's always the exactly perfect time to use them in the song. And the overall dark, evil atmosphere of the album is very enjoyable to me, and the concept and the way the music fits the concept, like I mentioned earlier, is another one of my favorite aspects about this album as a whole. So overall, I cannot recommend this album enough to Whitechapel fans, deathcore fans, death metal fans, extreme metal fans as a whole. And for me personally, this is a strong contender for Whitechapel's best album to date. For my taste, if they incorporated a little bit more melody and instrumental dynamics, I think it probably would be without question. But I'm very happy for Whitechapel, I'm very happy for their fans, and for me this album gets a 24 out of 30. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Definitely comment below your thoughts on this album if you have heard it so far. Remember to hit the subscribe button for more rock and metal album reviews and content. I got my Instagram, Spotify, and Threads links in the description of the video. And once again, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.